Welcome to the Pure Blood Dragon Soul Raid Guide. My name is Jib, and in this video we'll cover Warmaster Blackhorn, the 6th encounter in the Dragon Soul Raid instance. You'll need 2 tanks, 2 or 3 healers, and a balanced mix of DPS. Although the fight does favor ranged DPS and classes with a solid cleave or multi-targeting abilities. There are 2 phases to this encounter, the first dealing primarily with ad management, and the second with Warmaster Blackhorn himself. Let's take a look. Phase 1, abilities. The first and most important mechanic to mention in Phase 1 is the Skyfire, the flying gunship the encounter takes place on. Much like the gunship battle encounter in Iceborne, the Skyfire has a health bar, and if it runs out, the ship explodes and the fight is over. There's a few different ways that the ship can actually take damage. The most obvious is the Twilight Onslaught, which is cast by Jorina, Warmaster Blackhorn's mount, and can be seen as a large swirling purple graphic on the ground. This deals an extremely large amount of damage to the Skyfire if it is allowed to connect with the deck of the ship. You can avoid that by having your raid stand in the graphic before it lands. That causes your raid to take the damage instead of the Skyfire, and splits it between everyone who was hit. There will also be much smaller versions of the Twilight Onslaught called Twilight Barrage, cast by the several Twilight Assault units that will be flying around the area. These function mostly the same as Twilight Onslaughts. They just deal significantly less damage and thus don't need as many players to soak them. The only other way the Skyfire can take damage is from Twilight Sappers. These are the little goblins that will parachute onto the deck of the Skyfire, near the front of the ship. A drop of smoke bomb, which makes them invisible for a second, and then start running towards the ship's cabin. If they reach it, they'll explode, which does 20% of the ship's health and damage. Fortunately, they don't have a lot of health, and can be stunned, slowed, and even death. While all that is going on, you'll also need to deal with the Twilight Elite Dreadblades and Slayers. These are 2 larger ads that are almost exactly the same. Each deals heavy amounts of melee damage, and thus needs to be tanked. Each will randomly charge at a raid member, and deal a small amount of damage to everyone in the path, and each one will occasionally stack up a damage over time effect on anyone standing in front of them. The only difference is that the Dreadblade's damage over time effect, called Degeneration, deals shadow damage, while the Slayer's is called Brutal Strike, and deals physical damage. These debuffs start out as pretty low amounts of damage, but can be stacked up to pretty substantial, as the debuff itself lasts a full minute. For Twilight Barrage, we found pretty easiest for the ship. There's a pretty natural rotation. Assign a group. You'll be dealing with 3 waves of that land, starting with one area. One quadrant can each tank should pick up one of them, while the other 3 should take them off toward the side of the ship. Positioning that as long as you're properly soaking the onslaughts. If you want them to be close after each other, you don't need to allow melee every single barrage, but you'll still need the tanks need to be careful not to stand too close to each other. After the 3rd, otherwise you risk getting both Slayers have been killed. Meanwhile, Blackhorn you should start himself, having your leaping off attack mount onto the deck. Occasionally, some friendly NPCs will use harpoon guns on the side of the ships to latch onto a couple of the Twilight Assault Drakes and pull them in. When this happens, your ranged DPS should switch to killing them instead, while melee stays on the Dreadblades and Slayers. Once the Drakes are dead, ranged can go back to the melee ads. Note that your tank should alternate which ad they are tanking each wave. If you're just tanking Dreadblade, next time you should tank a Slayer, and vice versa. That's to make sure that the 1 minute damage over time effects have time to fall off. Of course, when a Sapper spawns, you'll want all your DPS to switch to killing them immediately. Stuns, slows, and death grip should go out as well. These are important, but killing them shouldn't be very difficult. The only other things to deal with in Phase 1 are the Twilight Barrage and Twilight Onslaughts. Onslaught is pretty straightforward. When there's a big pink swirly graphic on the ground, everybody needs to stand in it. The only players that should stay out are the 2 tanks. If you have them soaked in the Onslaught, you risk having the entire raid get that Brutal Strike or Degeneration. Phase 2 abilities. At the start of this phase, you'll be dealing with both Jorina and Warmaster Blackhorn. Jorina will stop using Twilight Onslaught and instead start casting Twilight Flames, which she'll target a random player and leave a large purple void zone on the ground that will have to about it. She'll continue casting this until she's running at 25% health, at which point deal pretty massive amount of damage to anyone caught in the cone, along with stunning them for 4 seconds. You'll also occasionally use Disruptive Roar, which does a bit less damage than Shockwave. It hits everyone in the raid. It also interrupts anybody within 10 yards for 8 seconds, so casters will need to stay at least 10 yards away. On top of that, you'll be stacking up a debuff called Devastate on the tank, which reduces their armor by 20% per stack. Finally, for every 1% of health that Blackhorn loses, you'll gain a stack of Vengeance, which causes them to deal 1% more damage per stack. So the strategy for Phase 2 is dealing with all of this is pretty simple. Although things can be pretty hectic at the start, ranged DPS should immediately start burning ground with the dragon. Get her to fly away as quickly as possible before you get overrun by twirling flames. Meanwhile, a tank should pick up Blackhorn and keep him near the center of the room, so that the ranged engage can spread out around him. Once the dragons are away, things get more simple. Casters will need to keep a distance away from Blackhorn to avoid getting interrupted by Disruptive Roar, but make sure not to get too far away, or you won't be able to move out of the shockwave in time. The tank should swap aggro every 3 stacks of Devastate, and save big defensive cooldowns for later in the fight when you'll be dealing huge amounts of damage due to Vengeance. Other than that, it's a simple matter of burning them down. Once you've gotten this far, Warmaster Blackhorn is all that stands between you and death. He might take a few attempts to get everything worked out smoothly, but once you've got him figured out, he shouldn't pose too big of a challenge.